Chapter 120, Workhouse. There is the presence of supernatural factors. Klein's eyes returned to normal, and he looked at Leonard and Fry. Leonard suddenly chuckled. Very professional, and deserving of the title of seer. Are you trying to hint at something? Klein muttered in his head. Fry opened his suitcase and took out a silver knife and other tools. He paused and asked, "The corpse tells me that she really died of a sudden heart attack. Do you have any way to divine a more detailed answer?" Klein nodded seriously and said, "I can attempt to combine a mediumship ritual and a dream divination. Hopefully, they'll be able to obtain something from Mrs. Lauis' remaining spirituality." Fry maintained his cold and reserved state. He took 2 steps back and said, "Give it a try." He turned his head sideways and looked at Klein. He suddenly sighed without much fluctuation in his tone. "You're getting more and more used to this kind of situation. It's not like I wanted it." Klein had an urge to cry. He then took out the bottles of pure dew, essential oils, and herbal powder. Then, he quickly set up the mediumship ritual. He chanted the honored titles of the Evernight goddess in the middle of the spirituality wall and recited his prayers in Hermes. Soon, wind spun around him and the light grew dimmer. Klein's eyes turned entirely black, and he repeated the divination statement, "The cause of Mrs. Lauis' death. The cause of Mrs. Lauis' death." He entered the dreamland while standing and saw a translucent spirit lingering around the corpse. Then, he extended his illusory right hand to touch Mrs. Lauis' remaining spirituality. In an instant, light burst out in front of him as scenes flashed past, one after another. There was a skinny and sallow lady dressed in ragged clothes, busily making matchboxes. She suddenly paused and held her chest. She was speaking to her 2 children. Her body wavered as she gasped for air. She was buying black bread when someone suddenly patted her. She was having the symptoms of a heart attack again and again. She was feeling weary and got into bed, but she never woke up ever again. Klein observed every single detail, intending to look for a trace of the supernatural factor. But when everything ended, he still hadn't gained any clues. As the blurriness shattered, Klein left the dreamland and returned to reality. He dispelled the wall of spirituality and said to the waiting Fry and amused Leonard, "There were no direct symptoms. Most of the scenes revealed that Mrs. Lauis had a heart ailment a long time ago. The only scene that was different was when Mrs. Lauis was patted on the back by someone. The hand was fair and slender, apparently a woman's. For such a family, they wouldn't go to a doctor unless they're very, very sick. Even if they were too cute at a free charity hospital, time is not something they can afford to lose. A day without work might mean no food on the table the next day." Leonard sighed emotionally like a poet. Fry looked at the corpse on the bed and sighed lightly. Before Klein spoke, Leonard quickly got out of his pensive state and said thoughtfully, "Are you implying that the supernatural factor came into play when Mrs. Lauis was patted? It came from the slender hand of a lady or madam?" Klein nodded and replied, "Yes, but this is merely my interpretation. Divination is always unclear." The conversation ended. He and Leonard stepped back to the other side of the bed and allowed Fry to take out his tools from his suitcase without any disturbance, so he could do a further examination. After Fry was done, they waited as he packed up his tools. After cleaning up and covering the corpse, he turned around and said, "Her death was caused by a natural heart disease. There's no doubt about it." Upon hearing the conclusion, Leonard paced back and forth. He even walked to the side of the door, paused for quite a while before saying, "That's it for now. Let's head over to the workhouse in Westboro. We'll see if we can find other clues. Maybe we can link the 2 incidents together." "Okay, we can only hope," Klein agreed, still filled with puzzlement. Fry picked up his suitcase, and while skipping and walking, he carefully went across the 2 floor mattresses without stepping on anyone's blanket. Leonard opened the door and walked out of the room first. He told Lois and the tenant, "You can return home now." Klein thought for a moment before adding, "Don't be in a hurry to bury the body. Wait for another day, as there might be one more thorough examination." "All right, officer," Lois bowed lightly and replied in a hurry. Then, feeling numbed and lost, he said, "Actually, I don't have the money to bury her just yet. I have to save for another few days, just a few more days. Luckily, the weather is turning cold." Klein was shocked and asked, "You plan on letting the corpse remain in the room for a few days?" Lois forced a smile and replied, "Yay, thankfully, the weather became colder recently. I can move the body onto the table at night. When we eat, I can carry her to the bed." Before he finished what he had to say, Fry suddenly interrupted, "I've left you money for the burial next to your wife." After saying those words in absolute calmness, he exited the apartment directly, unbothered by Lau's shocked expression and gratitude that followed. Klein followed closely and thought of a question. If the weather was still as hot as June or July, how would Lois deal with his wife's corpse? Pick a very dark night with strong winds, throw the corpse into the Tussock River or the Koi River, or just dig a hole and bury her. Klein knew that the law requiring a cemetery burial had been established more than 1,000 years ago, at the end of the previous epoch. The 7 major churches and imperial households from each country had approved the law in order to cut down on the number of water ghosts, zombies, and restless wraiths. Each country provided free land, while each church was in charge of keeping watch and patrolling. They only charged minimum fees for cremation and burial in order to pay for the necessary labor force. But even so, the truly poor still couldn't afford it. After leaving 130 for Iron Cross Street at Lower Street, the 3 Nighthawks and Bitch Mountbatten parted ways. Silently, they took a turn to the nearby workhouse in Westboro. As they got closer, Klein saw a long queue. It was just like when the people from the foodaholic empire on Earth queued for a shop that gone viral on the internet. The place was packed. "There's about 100, no, closer to 200, he muttered in surprise. He saw the people queuing were in tattered clothes with numb expressions. They only occasionally looked towards the door of the workhouse impatiently. Fry slowed down and said coldly, "There is a limit to the number of homeless poor each workhouse will accept daily. They can only take them in based on the queue order. Of course, the workhouse will examine and refuse entry to those who fail to meet the criteria." The economic recession in the recent months has played a part to Leonard's side. Those who don't manage to queue will have to figure out a way of their own, Klein asked subconsciously. They can also try their luck in the other workhouses. Different workhouses have different operating hours. However, each one has the same long line. Some of them would wait from 2 in the afternoon. Fry paused. The rest of the people mostly starve for a day. Then, they lose their ability to find a job and fall into a vicious cycle that leads directly to death. Those who can't withstand the hardship end up losing their struggle to stay on the good side of the law. Klein fell silent for a few seconds before letting out a sigh. The newspapers never publish any of this, Mr. Fry. I hardly ever hear you speak so much. I was once a pastor in a workhouse of the goddess. Fry maintained his cold attitude. When the 3 of them arrived at the door of the workhouse in Westboro, they showed their identity documents to the doorkeeper, who was eyeing the queuers arrogantly before they were taken into the workhouse. The workhouse was transformed from an old church. There were mattresses and hammocks all over the mass hall. The pungent scent of sweat, mixed with the smell of athlete's foot, permeated every corner. In and out of the hall, there were many poor families. Some swung hammers to break rocks, some picked oakum. No one was free. In order to not let poor people rely too much on workhouses and turn into scoundrels, The poor law established in 1336 enforced a rule whereby every poor person can only stay in the workhouse for 5 days at most. Any longer than that, one would be cast out. During the 5 days, they had to do manual labor, such as breaking rocks or picking oakum. These are the same tasks that criminals in prison do, Fry explained to Klein and Leonard briefly, without much emotion. Leonard opened his mouth, and no one was sure if he was teasing or explaining. When they leave this workhouse, they could go to another one. Of course, they might not be able to move in. Perhaps, to some people, poor people are like criminals. Picking oakum, Klein was quiet. He didn't know what else to ask. The fibers of old ropes are actually a great material to seal the gaps in boats. Fry stopped and found a burnt mark on the ground. A few minutes later, the director and pastor of the workhouse rushed over. They were both men in their 40s. Salas started the fire here and only burned himself to death, Leonard asked, pointing at the ashen mark on the ground. The director of the workhouse was a man with a broad, bumpy forehead. He scanned the area where Inspector Mitchell was pointing with blue eyes and nodded in affirmation. Yes. Before that, did Salas act strangely in any way? Klein asked. The director of the workhouse thought and said, according to the person that slept next to him. Salas had been chanting, "The Lord has given up on me. The world is too filthy. I have nothing left." Stuff along those lines. He was filled with resentment and hopelessness. But no one expected him to break all the kerosene lamps and start a fire to burn the place down while everyone was sleeping. Thank the Lord, someone found out in time and stopped his wicked act. Klein and Leonard then found a few people who had slept next to Salas the night before, and they also found the guard that stopped the tragedy. However, those people didn't have anything new to tell them. Of course, they used spirit vision, divination, and other methods to check if any of the people were lying or misleading them. It seems that Salas long had the idea to take revenge and self-destruct. It seems to be a very normal case. Leonard waited till the director and the pastor left to express his opinion. Klein pondered and said, "My divination tells me that a supernatural factor had influenced this case. Let's eliminate Salu's fire case temporarily," Leonard concluded. Just then, Fry suddenly said, "No, maybe there is another possibility. For example, Salas acted at the instigation of someone else, a beyonder who didn't take any supernatural measures." Klein's eyes lit up as he echoed, "It's very possible, such as the instigator from before. Instigatortress. But that wouldn't have any connection with Mrs. Lau's death," he thought, creasing his eyebrows lightly.